Rylan arrives on Orales, assigned to repair a crucial irrigation system after years of war. He encounters Lyra, who is already working on the canals. Their first meeting is tense, yet charged with curiosity. Introduce suspense. The irrigation system is failing dangerously, threatening the colony's harvest. Small, human-centered moments show ingenuity and personality. Rylan argues with machines, Lyra hums to drones. Both find humor in stubborn systems. The veteran and engineer collaborate on the failing irrigation system. They discover subtle sabotage or mechanical anomalies, suggesting someone is manipulating water flow for profit or control. Conversation reveals the themes of dignity, survival, and choice. Humans and aliens share quiet rebellion against bureaucracy and exploitation. They begin to respect each other's skill and resilience. Suspense, hints of a looming catastrophe with the colony's food supply. They reach the northern fields, discovering the experimental bioroute network is dying, crops wilting. A mysterious figure, government agent or saboteur, watches them from afar. Rylan and Lyra prepare to fix the network, aware this is more than just a mechanical failure. It's a test of ingenuity, courage, and rebellion. Welcome to my channel Starlight Sci-Fi Stories. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. The sky over Orales carried a color that no painter had ever captured. Pale steel and washed blue blended in a way that made the horizon seem distant and intimate all at once. The wind whispered across the arid plains, stirring fine dust in patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if the land itself had a rhythm, and only some could hear it. Captain Rylan J. stepped from the shuttle, boots sinking slightly in the stubborn soil, and squinted at the settlement below. Verdant Reach, the official name, promised life but showed scars. Retrofitted warehouses, solar arrays patched together with whatever metal the colonists could salvage, and a network of canals that twisted across the landscape like veins. Machines hummed in the distance, their sounds oddly alive, carrying the promise and threat of irrigation. Rylan carried his pack like armor. Years of war had taught him that the world could turn against you in an instant. Broken things, he understood. People, too, in their own ways. His hands were steady, calloused, and scarred. They remembered pressure and leverage better than words. He had survived things that should have ended him. Here, he hoped, survival would be quieter, simpler. A few meters away, someone was already working the canals. At first glance, she seemed human enough. Her hands were deft, her posture precise, and her eyes sharp. But her ears, long, tapered, and lined with faint iridescence, flicked as if they had their own mind. She hummed under her breath in a way that set the local drones off balance. When she noticed Rylan, she straightened, cocking her head, ears twitching like sentinels. "You're late," she said, voice light but carrying authority. "I came when I came," Rylan replied, letting his pack drop with a muted thud. "And the soil here looks exactly like it was expecting me." She glanced at the ground, then back at him. "It has opinions. You'll learn to respect them." "Or argue with them," he said, smiling faintly. The soil could not reply, but it made a small complaint as he planted his spade. Rylan didn't wait for introductions. He had a job to do, and so did she. The colony depended on the canals. Without them, the seedlings wouldn't survive the harsh season ahead. Water here was life, and life had no patience for bureaucratic excuses. She moved along the channel, adjusting valves and checking readings projected faintly in the air. Her fingers were precise, confident. Rylan watched her for a moment, nodding the way her ears flattened slightly when she concentrated, then twitched when a drone refused to cooperate. He had learned to read subtle signs like that in war, and it gave him a small measure of ease. Someone who could command machines and soil alike was someone worth observing. They began the work in silence at first. Water channels needed clearing, valves needed recalibration, and Rylan's experience with stubborn machinery made him a useful partner. Yet the silence was not emptiness. It was the sound of two people negotiating with a world that was neither fully cooperative nor entirely hostile. "The northern fields are worst," she said after a while. "The bioroot network is failing. The seedlings lie like flags tired of the sun." "I'll take a look," Rylan replied. "I've had a lot of practice with tired things that needed waking." As they moved, the world unfolded around them. Small drones flitted about, some singing soft mechanical tunes, others squeaking like children when pressed into mischief. A few goats wandered among the fields, chrome hooves glinting. Rylan chuckled when one rammed a drone mid-flight, sending it spinning gently into a mud puddle. Lyra, he learned that was her name, laughed too, the sound carrying across the field like rainfall in the dry season. "I fix things," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Machines soil, sometimes people." "You leave people alone?" he asked. "Only when they deserve it," she replied. Her smile was small, knowing. "Mostly I fix what I can." They worked together, a rhythm forming naturally. Rylan's strength, Lyra's precision, blunt tools and delicate adjustments, spades and calibrators, hands and fingers, laughter and muttered complaints about bureaucracy and the stubbornness of life. Slowly, the channels began to respond. Water trickled, then flowed more confidently. The seedlings lifted their leaves as if they had been holding their breath, waiting for someone who cared. When the first true stream reached the northernmost field, Rylan wiped his hands on his trousers and leaned back against a valve housing. Lyra crouched beside him, monitoring readings. "Not bad," she said. "You might survive the soil's opinions after all." "I'm counting that as progress," he replied. They didn't speak much of their pasts at first. The land demanded focus, and the colony's survival was enough story to fill any hour. But small confessions slipped through cracks in conversation. Rylan mentioned the war in fragments, sieges, burned cities, metals that felt lighter than expected. Lyra spoke of her people, the Vashari, and how they had been sent to survive where survival was required. The galaxy valued them for practicality, she said, but seldom for the dignity of their lives. "You survive by being useful," Rylan said quietly, "but usefulness isn't the only way to matter." She glanced at him, ears twitching. "Some things are harder to teach than irrigation," she admitted. "Choice, dignity, rebellion in small ways." He smiled. "I know about small rebellions. Some of us specialize in them." By mid-afternoon, the bulk of the work was done. Water coursed through channels, valves responded predictably, drones hummed a more cheerful tune, and the fields showed the faintest shimmer of hope. Yet the northern bioroot network still struggled. "The roots aren't just dehydrated," Lyra said, kneeling to inspect the network. "Someone has interfered. Look at these sensors. They've been miscalibrated on purpose. And the nutrient flow, it's being throttled." Rylan crouched beside her, scanning the network. "Sabotage." "Possibly," she said. Her ears flattened as she studied a reading. "Or the galaxy's way of testing patience." He frowned. The galaxy had a way of doing that, yes. Testing patience, resilience, and sometimes humanity itself. Yet he felt a stubborn hope. The systems could be coaxed. Machines, soil, and people alike could respond if treated with skill, respect, and occasional humor. "You ready to coax it?" he asked. She nodded, a small gleam of determination in her eyes. Be gentle and stubborn. And so they worked. Rylan approached the network with a veteran's patience, hands sure where machines failed him. Lyra's fingers wove delicate patterns along the roots, coaxing responses from nanothreads and engineered microbes. A drone buzzed impatiently above, as if offering advice in mechanical tones. The sun dipped low, painting the field with golden streaks, and still they persisted. They spoke little, words unnecessary for most of the work. Yet in quiet moments, humor emerged, small jokes about the drones, playful complaints about stubborn soil, and the absurdity of bureaucracy attempting to quantify life. It was a rebellion of small, human-centered acts against a galaxy that measured worth in efficiency and productivity. By nightfall, the network had begun to respond. Water moved more freely, sensors registered healthier levels, and the seedlings lifted slightly in cautious optimism. Rylan and Lyra sat on the edge of the northern field, sharing a meal of bland ration packs that somehow tasted better than expected. "You fix machines, soil, and maybe even the galaxy," Rylan said quietly. "Machines, soil, and people who want fixing," she replied, voice thoughtful, "but only sometimes." He laughed softly, the sound grounding him. "Sometimes is enough. Sometimes is all anyone really needs." A breeze swept through the field, carrying the metallic scent of machinery, the earthy smell of soil, and the faintest hint of flowering seedlings. Somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter rose, unbroken by the difficulties of the day. Rylan glanced at Lyra, and in her eyes he saw something that resembled hope, stubborn, careful, unclaimed hope. They watched the field together, shoulders brushing lightly, hands occasionally meeting. No grand speeches, no formal declarations, only the quiet, deliberate act of presence and choice. Here, in a small corner of the galaxy, dignity and survival intertwined. And Rylan understood something vital. Humans could thrive, not because the galaxy favored them, but because they chose to fight for each other, for small victories, and for the stubborn persistence of life. As stars blinked into existence overhead, Rylan felt the weight of history behind him and the quiet promise of possibility ahead. The northern field might have been saved, but the work of survival, of choice, of small rebellion, had only just begun. He turned to Lyra, who was adjusting a stubborn sensor with careful fingers, and smiled. "Tomorrow, we see if the network decides to cooperate fully, and if it does." "We adapt," she said, finishing for him. "We adapt." And that was enough. The morning came quietly, as if the world itself wanted to observe the results of yesterday's labor before speaking. The sun rose over the plains of Orales in a pale, deliberate arc, washing the canals in soft steel light. Water flowed in tidy, obedient lines, but the northern bioroute network still carried stubborn knots of resistance. Rylan carried his tools, ready for whatever the day would demand. Beside him, Lyra moved with the easy precision of someone who had negotiated survival for centuries. Her long ears tucked back against her head, catching nothing, but giving her an unmistakable aura of attentiveness. They walked the narrow paths between canals, boots stirring dust that smelled faintly of metal and seed. "The northern field," Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's testing us again. Sensors are misreading in cycles, and the roots, they've decided to partially ignore nutrient input." Rylan frowned, kneeling to inspect the intricate web of nano-threads and living roots. Either someone interfered, or it's learning how far it can push the colony before it breaks. She gave a short laugh, one that carried the weight of unspoken histories. Sometimes the universe has the same sense of humor as a bureaucrat. Either way, we coax it. Coaxing was the word for it. Rylan had learned that brute force was rarely enough when coaxing machines or people. Patience, observation, and stubborn consistency could achieve what raw strength could not. He began adjusting valves, rerouting water flows in subtle ways. Lyra followed, threading microcode into the bioroute network, her fingers deft, almost musical, as she whispered small sequences to the living threads. "You know," Rylan said, "I never thought I'd be doing this, fixing a root network with a poet's fingers and a soldier's hands." Lyra didn't look up. "Poetry is in persistence," she said, "and hands, they carry memory. Yours remember how to keep things alive." They worked in silence for hours, occasionally sharing small jokes to lighten the tension. A drone flitted past, humming a half-tuned old jazz tune. One of the chrome goats attempted to follow it, miscalculating its leap and landing in a shallow puddle. Rylan and Lyra laughed. Humor, they both understood, was as vital as water. It reminded the mind and body that survival was not only duty but choice. By mid-afternoon, subtle changes appeared. The bioroute network, once defiant, began to respond. Water flowed more evenly, Nutrients distributed more predictably, and seedlings lifted cautiously. The field was not fully tamed, but the beginnings of success shimmered in the weak light. Lyra paused, resting her hands on her knees. It's cooperating, but barely. Something else is influencing it. External interference, perhaps. Sensors suggest. Someone is monitoring these fields. Ryland's frown deepened. Saboteurs. Or observers. The galaxy loves auditors, inspectors, and those who measure human effort like it's an equation to be balanced. Her voice carried no bitterness, only the cold weight of experience. Either way, we'll adapt. Adaptation was familiar to both of them. Ryland had survived the front lines of war where adaptation meant life or death. Lyra had survived centuries of colonial displacement, her people valued for their utility but rarely for their humanity. They worked together with a quiet rhythm, patience, and stubborn resolve. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the northern field. Water ran cleanly in channels, the bioroute network pulsated with cautious life, and drones hummed softly as if acknowledging the small victory. Ryland wiped his hands on his trousers, letting the quiet satisfaction settle in him. "You think the city will ever understand what we do here?" he asked. Lyra glanced at him, her ears flicking once. "They don't need to understand, they only need to account for it. The galaxy measures value differently. Efficiency, productivity, human contact isn't on their charts." Ryland nodded, thinking of the reports he had seen. Colonies reduced to ledger entries. People measured by yield, by what they could produce or repair. The Vashari, her people, existed for utility. But here, among canals, soil, and machines, they carved out dignity for themselves, one small rebellion at a time. "You ever get tired of being useful?" he asked gently. "Useful is safe," she said. "But safe is not living, my people. We survive. We endure. Sometimes that's all the galaxy allows." Ryland reached out, brushing a strand of dust from her cheek. "Survival doesn't mean acceptance, and you've earned more than endurance. You've earned respect, and not the kind written on forms." Her ears twitched, a small, unguarded motion. Respect is complicated, but perhaps here it can be felt rather than measured. Even as they spoke, the northern field began to change more decisively. Water distributed evenly, seedlings lifted with growing confidence, and sensors stabilized. Machines, soil, and roots seemed to recognize cooperation, responding to careful touch and attention. By nightfall, the field had begun to thrive. A gentle hum filled the air from drones, the rhythmic flow of water, and the subtle pulse of bioroutes. Stars blinked overhead, small, punctual witnesses to human persistence and Vashari patience. Ryland and Lyra sat on the edge of the field, sharing a meal of simple tubers and ration packs. They ate in companionable silence at first, but then conversation resumed, drifting into fragments of their lives, memories of war and displacement, small joys and practical jokes about machinery and bureaucracy. "You make jokes about machines," Ryland said at one point, "but you also coax them like living things. You have patience." "And you have strength," she replied. "Not just physical, but the strength to decide, to act, to defy expectation. That's rare. Most people follow rules because it's easier than thinking for themselves." Ryland laughed softly. "I follow some rules, only the ones that make sense." "Then perhaps we're both rare," she said, a small wry smile tugging at her lips. Days passed in similar rhythm. They monitored the fields, coaxed machines, adjusted bioroute networks, and taught the colony to work with them, not against them. Word spread quietly of the northern field's recovery. The village elders, initially skeptical of outside assistance, began to see results. Crops stabilized, water flowed more predictably, and morale lifted. Then came the delegation from the city. Officials in pristine suits and stiff collars, carrying sensors, reports, and pamphlets that smelled faintly of ozone and authority. They arrived expecting compliance, hopping to measure success and assign credit. Rylan and Lyra met them on the edge of the northern field. The city's representative, a woman with thin eyebrows and sharper eyes, scanned the scene, then looked at Lyra. "Would your people consider a formal arrangement?" she asked, as if policy manuals and ledger entries could encompass human lives. Rylan stepped forward, hands relaxed but voice firm. "We offer only what the fields provide freely. We do not trade people. We trade crops, advice, and occasionally humor." Lyra lifted one ear, her stance resolute. "We are not a commodity. We are villagers. We will not be catalogued." A long silence followed. The delegation's leader blinked, consulting a manual that could not account for defiance presented without fear. The colony held its breath, the machines humming as if waiting. Then a farmer laughed, a simple, unceremonious sound that carried the weight of lived experience. Others joined, clapping and cheering softly. Approval, laughter, and dignity had not been requested. They were freely given. The delegation retreated, perplexed, leaving the village to its own way of measuring worth. Rylan and Lyra watched them leave, standing shoulder to shoulder. There were no banners, no speeches. Only the quiet assertion that life, dignity, and choice mattered more than ledger lines and bureaucratic calculations. The northern field thrived in the days that followed. Crops grew in orderly, stubborn rows. Water flowed reliably. Machines obeyed more readily, and the villagers, once hesitant, found confidence in small decisions and shared responsibility. Children played among canals and drones, imitating Lyra's long ears with folded paper. Practical jokes became lessons in cooperation. Rylan and Lyra, once strangers brought together by duty, had become symbols of stubborn dignity and quiet rebellion. They repaired what could be repaired, coaxed life where it resisted, and without ceremony, taught the colony that choice and humanity mattered. One evening, after the fields were secure, they sat on the canal's edge, watching the stars blink into existence. Lyra spoke first. "The galaxy will always measure people by utility, but here we measure by persistence, by kindness, by what survives the long nights." Rylan nodded. "And sometimes that's enough to change things. Not all at once, not loudly, but quietly. Small, stubborn changes can ripple." She smiled, ears twitching gently. "Perhaps the galaxy cannot swallow everything. Some things persist. Some small things like dignity and laughter." He reached for her hand. Simple, practical, unceremonious. Not a declaration, not a vow, only choice. She did not shy away. Their hands met, fingers interlacing with the quiet weight of shared understanding. They remained like that until the wind softened, the stars blinked down, and the northern field thrummed softly, alive and persistent. Machines, soil, roots, and people had all learned to bend to a different rhythm, one of cooperation, care, and quiet rebellion. In the end, there were no grand victories, no medals, no formal recognition. The city could not catalog what had happened, and the galaxy would measure only what it chose to. But the northern field, the villagers, and two determined individuals had created something that could not be erased. Proof that humans and their allies could assert worth beyond utility, that small acts of choice and dignity mattered, and that survival was never enough. Living fully, defiantly, was the goal. Rylan squeezed Lyra's hand gently. "Tomorrow we keep coaxing." "We adapt," she replied. And together they faced the quiet night of Orales, knowing that survival, choice, and stubborn hope would endure.